Spectre is one of those James Bond films that genuinely had everything it needed to be a classic. The cast was there, the locations were stunning, the action was solid, and yet somehow it still managed to fumble some of the most important things that could have made it a truly great movie. So, in this video, I want to talk about why Spectre was actually a good film, even though it had some pretty crappy flaws, and why it deserved better than what the writers gave it. Let's start with the biggest issue. The idea that every single villain from Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, and Skyfall was secretly connected to one big organization, Spectre. Sounds incredible on paper. One shadowy organization pulling the strings behind everything. That should have been interesting enough. Instead, it felt too convenient, almost lazy, like the writers looked at 3 separate films with 3 separate stories and decided retroactively that they were all somehow connected. To be honest with you, that does not add depth to those previous Bond films. It actually just cheapens them. Silva's vendetta against M in Skyfall was deeply personal and psychologically complex. Reducing that to just another Spectre operation strips away everything that made him compelling as a villain. So having this evil organization just felt misplaced, and it didn't feel like it belonged there. And then there are the pictures of Vesper and M. Ernst Stavro Blofeld puts a bunch of photos of Vesper on a wall somewhere, and he basically uses them to torment Bond and remind him that, yeah, he is basically the one who caused their deaths. I thought it was interesting for a moment. Bond had a deeply personal reason to eliminate Blofeld, but the way this movie constantly reminded us that Vesper and M were killed by this man called Blofeld, it just gets annoying to a point. Like, how many times are we supposed to feel sorry for James? Casino Royale handled Vesper's impact on Bond with extraordinary emotional depth. We did not need Blofeld waving photographs around to remind us that Bond lost someone he loved, and someone who was basically a mother figure. It felt manipulative and definitely not meaningful. Like the producers were so worried we had forgotten Vesper and M that they physically showed us their faces just to make sure we connected the dots ourselves like we're freaking babies. Bond's grief did not need that kind of assistance. Oh look, you see the photos of the people that died and you cared about deeply? Yeah, it was this random guy called Blofeld who did it. Go and attack him. Like, no. It just feels so cheap. You know, something else that definitely shapes the entire atmosphere of Spectre is the absence of Judi Dench's M. In the previous 3 films, M functioned as something close to a maternal figure for Bond. She challenged him, protected him, believed in him even when she was publicly condemning him. That relationship gave Bond an anchor. Ralph Fiennes, I'm pretty sure I butchered that name, but whatever. He is actually great in the role, but the dynamic is completely different. There is no history, no tension built over years, and the emotional weight that Judi Dench's M brought to every scene simply cannot be replicated overnight. Spectre feels lonelier because of that absence, and while that loneliness is actually appropriate for the story, it makes us feel what Bond is feeling in those moments, and it also means Bond feels more isolated than ever. This actually connects perfectly to one of the film's most underrated themes, the systematic dismantling of the 00 program. The entire infrastructure that Bond operates within is being threatened with a shutdown. The argument being made is that human intelligence and field agents are obsolete in a world of mass surveillance and drones. And what makes this hit harder than it sounds is the timing. Bond is already isolated emotionally. He lost M. He is operating largely alone, and now the institution itself is under threat. There is nobody coming to save him. No safety net, no support system. Just Bond doing what Bond does, while the world argues about whether Bond should still even exist. Like, that idea honestly had me at the edge of my seat, and I wish the film had leaned into that theme even more. Now, let's talk about the scene that actually had me shook. Ernst Stavro confronts Bond and Madeline and reveals that he has been listening to Bond's entire conversation with Mr. White. Every word. Every detail. The moment that Madeline processes that her father gave up the location of Spectre specifically to protect her, and that Bond used that information to find her, is one of the most jaw-dropping moments in the entire film. Think about what Madeline is feeling in that moment. Her father, a man she had a deeply complicated relationship with, essentially traded the most dangerous secret he possessed just to keep her safe. And Bond, a man she's beginning to trust, walked into her life partly because of information extracted from her dying father. She was used as a connection point between them without her knowledge or consent. The look on her face in that moment tells us she felt less like a person and more like a piece on a chessboard. And she was basically used as leverage even though she wanted nothing to do with that kind of life. Now that is powerful storytelling. Also, if you'd like to see more movie essays from me, then consider hitting that sub button. Cool? Awesome. Now, here is where I have to be honest about the film's weakest point. The revelation that Ernst Stavro Blofeld is actually Franz Oberhauser, Bond's childhood foster brother. It is one of the most unnecessary pieces of backstory in the entire franchise. The idea that Blofeld's motivation for building a criminal organization responsible for countless deaths traces back to childhood jealousy over a father figure is just so stupid, man. Like, I can't. This is Blofeld. His menace should be ideological, philosophical, or at least terrifying in its ambition. Instead, we get a brotherly rivalry that feels like it belongs in a completely different movie. Like, it doesn't add anything meaningful to the story, and it actually makes him look less threatening. And Christoph Waltz is far too talented as an actor to be saddled with a motivation this boring. Having said all that, Christoph Waltz's performance is still really good. That permanent smug expression he has throughout the entire film really annoyed me, but it is annoying in exactly the right way. There is something about the way Waltz plays Blofeld that suggests this man has never once in his life felt genuinely threatened by anything or anyone except for Bond. He is not menacing because he is violent, he is menacing because he is constantly and completely unbothered by many things. And that composure in the face of James Bond, a man who has survived everything, is actually more unsettling than any physical threat. So the revelation that Blofeld was behind Vesper's death connects Spectre directly to Casino Royale in a way that works, because this is not just about a global criminal organization anymore. This is personal. Vesper Lind was the woman who broke James Bond open emotionally, the person who made him vulnerable in a way he had never allowed before. And discovering that her death was not random, but orchestrated by the same man now sitting across from him transforms the entire film's stakes. Bond's mission is no longer professional. It is deeply, painfully personal. And the emotional stakes under all of the action is what gives Spectre its best moments. I want to take a moment to talk about Tangier, Morocco, because that desert setting is one of the most beautiful locations in recent Bond history. I don't know, there is something about the vast, empty landscape surrounding Bond and Madeline that actually feels symbolic. Now remember, these are two people who are defined by loneliness. Bond has spent his entire adult life using relationships as temporary distractions rather than genuine connections. Madeline grew up as the daughter of a dangerous man, isolated by a world she never asked to be a part of. And here they are, two isolated people surrounded by nothing but empty space. The desert does not only look beautiful, it reflects exactly who they are at that point in their journey together. And then there's the ending. Blofeld is hurt, M is on one side, and Madeline is on the other. Bond has a gun to Blofeld's head, and every instinct his entire career has built tells him to pull the trigger. But he doesn't. He walks away, and he walks directly towards Madeline, not toward M. I don't think that was accidental. M represents duty, institution, the life Bond has always known. Madeline represents something Bond has spent his entire career avoiding: genuine human connection, vulnerability, the possibility of a life beyond the mission. In that single moment of choosing which direction to walk, James Bond makes the most significant decision of his entire arc. He chooses love over legacy. He chooses the person over the purpose. And for a character who has spent 4 films building walls around himself, that walk toward Madeline is one of the most emotionally satisfying moments in the entire Craig era. Spectre is a flawed film. The connected villain backstory is weak. The brother angle is unnecessary, and some of the emotional manipulation feels unearned. But underneath those flaws is an interesting story about isolation, personal loss, and a man finally choosing to stop running from the people who care about him. It had the potential to be the definitive Bond film of the Craig era. It did not quite get there, but what it did get right, it got beautifully right. Drop a comment. Do you think Spectre deserved better than the reception it got? I want to know where you stand.